Hi, my name is Francis Shen. With the support of the Dana Foundation, we're excited to be creating the Dana Foundation Career Network on Neuroscience and Society, joined today by Alyssa.
Hi, my name is Alisa Sosa. I'm a student at the University of Puerto Rico in Aguadilla. I'm also a research assistant working on the Dana Career Network for Neuroscience and Society project.
And we're really excited today to be joined by Dr. Camelia Kuhnen, Professor of Finance, and Sarah Graham Keenan, Distinguished Scholar at the University of North Carolina Kenan-Flagler Business School. She is an expert on neuroeconomics, is the past president of the Society for Neuroeconomics, and is training both in finance and neuroscience. So you're the perfect person to talk to about neuroeconomics. We're so excited you're here with us today. And the first question is, what was the career path that got you to begin working in neuroeconomics, taking leadership role? And maybe you can talk about why you decided to put neuro into your finance and economics research.
Hi there. It's very nice to be here. I'm happy to share my story with you. So I grew up in Romania, actually under communism. I was 11 when the country became a democracy in December 1989. So, when I was a kid, I never thought I would do neuroeconomics or that I would live in the United States. But thankfully, since the country became a democracy, I was able to think about studying abroad. So in 1997, I got a scholarship to go to MIT. And when I went there, I thought I was going to go to medical school afterwards. Back in Romania, the thought that I had that I think my parents were responsible for in part was that I was going to go to med school in Romania and become a neurosurgeon. I was sort of told that I should do that. And you know what? I sort of liked the idea. But I got into MIT and I thought, no problem, I could go to the US and go to medical school there. And I did neuroscience as my first major at MIT. But about a year and a half into my studies there, somebody from the financial aid office said, hey, Cami, you say here in your paperwork that you want to go to med school after you're done with MIT, but you're an international student, right? And I'm like, yeah, I'm from Romania. So this woman said, as an international student, you cannot go to med school in this country unless you're able to secure a $250,000 loan from a US bank, for which you will need to have an American cosigner. So she asked me point blank, do you have a friend who would be able to co-sign this loan with you for you to go to med school? And I said, no, I'm just some poor kid from Romania. I don't have a friend like this. So she said, then you cannot go to med school. And that was a shock to me, right? I had this plan in my head since when I was a kid. And she said, by the way, neuroscience by itself, this major is lovely, but it's not going to lead you to having a high-paying job right away for sure. If you just do neuroscience and you graduate, you probably want to do a PhD and then a postdoc and another postdoc, and maybe you'll then become a professor someday. But it's not going to be quick and easy. So she thought maybe I should add another major just to feel safe about my career prospects. So back then, this was like already 1999, I would say. Back then, we were in the middle of the dot-com bubble, for those of you who remember that. And Wall Street was hot and everybody wanted to work on Wall Street. All of my MIT friends wanted to try a stint there. So I thought maybe I should just add finance as a second major, because I thought I would always be able to find a job. As an international student, you have in the back of your mind this question, can I get a job after I graduate? So it was important for me to have a portfolio of degrees that will allow me to have a job. So I added finance as a second major, and it turns out I really loved it. And I realized, as I was finishing my undergraduate degrees at MIT, I realized that there was a lot of overlap actually between finance and neuroscience. A lot of neuroscience is about decision making. It's about choice, right? How we perceive stimuli, how we make choices. And a lot of finance or economics is about choice. So I thought there's a lot of overlap between these two fields. Wouldn't it be nice at some point to do something that involves knowledge from both of these fields? I applied to a PhD program in finance. I went to Stanford for my PhD, and while I was doing my sort of regular finance courses and thinking about my regular or normal finance dissertation, I thought, I want to try to do something that involves both neuroscience and finance because I love both of these fields. And I was so lucky that at that time at Stanford, there was a professor in the psychology department. His name is Brian Knudsen, who was teaching a course on the neuroscience of affect. And I thought from behavioral finance and behavioral economics, I thought, emotions probably play a role in how we make economic decisions. There are all of these biases in how we make choices that the behavioral economists have documented. And I thought that understanding the role of affect and those biases might be very useful. It might be a way to merge these two fields. So I reached out to this neuroscience young professor and I said, hey, Professor Knudsen, I'm a PhD student in the finance department at the business school. I want to, take your class and ideally work with you on something that involves finance and neuroscience. And you know what? He said yes to that request. I'm so grateful to this day that he was willing to work with this, just young PhD student. And so the two of us ended up writing a paper that is one of my most cited papers to the day about the neural basis of financial risk taking. This was the first paper where people were given money. They were put in a brain scanner, and we asked them to make financial decisions to split their money between risky choices and safe choices. And we wanted to see where in the brain people keep track of risk, of reward, and what brain areas are involved in the trade-offs that lead to the ultimate choices, how to invest your money. And so again, this was the first paper where people were studying financial choices using fMRI, and that was great fun. And it basically put me on this path of doing neuroeconomics for many years in my career. So the other thing that was very lucky for me, aside from having background both in neuroscience and in finance, was that at Stanford there were a couple of other faculty in the economics department. One of them was Antonio Rangel, who's at Caltech now, so between Antonio Rangel at Stanford then, and also Colin Camelia at Caltech, who Antonio was friends with, and Brian, who was a Stanford in neuroscience, I had several people who had the same interest of combining these two fields, neuroscience and economics broadly, or finance in particular. So I sort of got on the bandwagon of neuroeconomics just as it was starting as a field. That was the first, that year when I was working with Brian was the first year when people are thinking about having a conference on neuroeconomics, and we started a Society for Neuroeconomics. Eventually I became the president of that several years down the road after I finished my PhD and I was a professor already. But it just, I would not have guessed that this would be my path. If you asked me this when I was in high school, I would not have said that I was going to do neuroeconomics, right? So it just took not having the ability to get a loan to go to med school. It took running into just the right people at Stanford who were interested in working together and combining these two fields. And here I am now. I made my career by pushing forward this field of neuroeconomics. Right now, I would say my work is a little bit broader. I do what's called household finance. So I'm not restricting myself to just using methods from neuroscience to understand decision-making in a financial context. I use other methods too and other types of data. But I still think every day about how people, households, how they think about financial risk and reward, how they think about, consuming now versus saving for later, how they form expectations about what might happen down the road to their own situation or to the macroeconomy. So how do beliefs form in our heads about quantities which are important for then how we choose today, how to spend our money. So this is how I got to where I am right now.
It's so impressive how you managed to find the perfect career that complements both of your interests. To continue, we would love to know what the day-to-day practice of a person who works in neuroeconomics looks like.
This depends on where your primary appointment is. So I'm a professor in a business school in the finance department. You might also talk to people who are working as professors of neuroscience, for example, in the neuroscience or psychology department. So our day-to-day lives will look different. Being in a business school, I have some funding that's coming straight from the business school. I don't have to apply for grants sort of every year, you know, and I do not have to pay from my own research money, PhD students or postdocs. At a business school, PhD students are admitted by the entire business school, and they're paid from funds that are sort of general funds for the business school or general university funds. So the pressure in terms of getting funds to pay PhD students, for example, that pressure is much less of an issue in a business school setting. If you're, you know, in the neuroscience department as a PI, that pressure is a lot on you, right? You have to secure the grants to pay your students. Now, if I want to run a large study, you know, like an imaging study, we know that costs money, not just how much you have to pay your PhD students, right, to be there, but you need to run time on the magnet and all kinds of costs. So for that, I do need to apply for grants, or I have to find collaborators who are in neuroscience departments. And honestly, this has been the most fruitful path for me, is to have collaborators on papers who are neuroscientists, because they've already figured out what's the cheapest way to get time on the scanner, or how to find a good statistician to help you with your data analysis and so forth. So I've had wonderful collaborators who are at Stanford or at Duke, just to name a couple, who they've made my life easy, right? In terms of taking the pressure from me to get huge grants every year. But I also think that they've benefited from working with an economist or with a finance academic on their team, because it is really good to put on the team people from different disciplines. I think you can ask super interesting questions, or you can see things in a different manner than if you had a team from just one department.
Okay, so for students and others watching this, what advice would you give them about pursuing a career that includes neuroeconomic work?
Well, I think, you know, you should pursue it if you really feel that this is interesting to you, right? To me, that the idea of mixing knowledge from these two fields, that idea was interesting to me as an undergraduate student, and it continued to be super interesting to this day. So you need to feel that interest, that curiosity, otherwise don't do it, you know, do something else. But then aside from that, you need to be strategic. So think about which sort of department would you fit in best if you choose to be an academic, right? Would you be more comfortable being in a neuroscience department, or in a med school, or in a business school, or in an econ department? So you can do neuroeconomics work in all of these settings. But the settings are somewhat different, and you need to decide which one is better for you, which one is a better fit for you. And then you try to find the right mentors, and those mentors should be, you know, most of them should be in the type of department that you will be joining. So if I want to work in an econ department or finance department, then most of my mentors should work in those kinds of departments, because they will understand, you know, all of the details of day-to-day life and how to get grants or how things just work in those departments. The other thing that I would suggest in terms of just thinking about this strategically, because it's not an easy path, right? It's not an easy path because it is an interdisciplinary field, and it, by its nature, it means that the work in this field will have to satisfy basically two types of people for it to be published. So it's harder than just publishing something that's plain, regular econ or regular finance stuff or regular neuroscience. So it's difficult because it is interdisciplinary, and you'll have sort of two sets of judges who need to give you a thumbs up for your papers to be published. So because it's difficult to publish in a field like this, you need to be strategic in terms of how you structure your papers. So for example, when I was early in my career, I naively thought that I could send my papers that had a lot of neuroscience in them, including maybe new methods from neuroscience, or maybe we were investigating an area that wasn't quite yet established already as functionally being important for some aspect of decision making, right? So there was a lot of novel stuff in the papers that I was writing that was novel even for a neuroscience audience, and I was trying to pitch those papers to a standard finance journal, because in the papers there was also something new in terms of the finance part of it. And I learned that that's just not that was not a good way to do things, because when you send papers to journals, the editors of those journals and the referees, the reviewers of the journals, they can only take so much novel stuff in one paper. If there is too much new stuff, especially if it's new stuff from two fields, they don't know what to do about that. They don't know how to evaluate it. Maybe if you send the paper to a finance journal, they just don't know which referee might have the right neuroscience knowledge to see if your methods are correct. Like if you did your brain imaging data analysis correct, right? So if they don't have the right reviewer to evaluate your paper, then that paper is not going to fly at that journal, right? So I learned basically to not put too many new things in one paper. You cannot innovate too much, because it's just it'll be very difficult to get that thing published. So every paper should just have one new thing, and if that new thing is more on the neuroscience side, then you should need to send the paper to neuroscience journals. If that new thing is more about something about finance, even though it builds on insights from neuroscience, then you can send the paper to finance journals. So just don't try to do everything in one paper. That's my advice. Be strategic. Some of your papers will be natural fits for neuroscience journals, and other papers will be more of a natural fit for econ or finance journals. So little small bites, right? Build your career with again, papers that just make one novel point instead of trying to innovate on both fronts, which is what I did in the beginning. And again, I learned it's basically impossible to publish that way.
Great advice. And what a wonderful story. We really appreciate you sharing it with us and with all the students watching. There are other links on the site to learn more about neuroeconomics, and we hope anyone watching will. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Absolutely.